I'm Alex Stone, former military service member and law enforcement officer. Now CEO of Echelon Protective Services, one of the fastest growing private security firms on the West Coast. And this is Ride Along, where our guest and I witness firsthand the issues affecting our community. I believe our proven method of enacting meaningful change through compassion and understanding is the best way to make our streets a safer place and truly achieve security through community.
My name is Eli Saslow. I'm a staff writer for the New York Times. I live in Portland, and I'm writing about Echelon and what they do.
Welcome back to the Ride Along. I'm Alex Stone, your host. Our guest tonight is Eli Saslow. He is a journalist for the New York Times, and he's here to actually kind of do something a little bit unique and different. He's going to be really interviewing me. We've done this a couple of times with other media personalities, and I think that this guy is one of the probably the top tier journalists that I've encountered. He also, that. Yeah, of course, yeah. I'm not just saying that. He actually does a really good job. You've won the Pulitzer Prize twice.
I have
in journalism.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And so that's seen as a pretty substantial type of prize, right?
Yeah. Within journalism, it's sort of the big prize, but I've won that prize basically for doing like deeply reported, embedded work where I write about how places are dealing with the big issues in the country, which is how we met, because I think you guys right now are very much at the forefront of some of the big issues in the country and working on them here in Portland. So really, I just appreciate you letting me tag along and spend time kind of watching and observing and learning about what you guys are doing.
So you're not a fly-by-night journalist.
I'm not a fly-by-night journalist.
And we're not, I don't mean that as a pejorative.
Sure.
But you're paid to spend time on one topic versus other journalists who are paid to meet deadlines with a variety of topics. Sometimes 10, 20, 30 stories are working at one time.
And my job is, unfortunately become increasingly uncommon in journalism because my job is
very true.
It's expensive, right? Like I write 8 stories a year and I make a full-time salary, whereas there are some people whose job is to write 8 blog posts a day, right? And
wow.
So it's a very different kind of thing. It's a lot of writing.
Wow.
Whereas mine, the stories are long, but at least I don't have to do 8 of them a day.
Yeah.
It's burying in for several weeks at a time to really invest time and energy in the people that I'm writing about. So hopefully
I really
the
like
stories
that.
are nuanced. Yeah,
I like that, and I wish we had more of that. I think sometimes there are individuals within media who, because they're meeting a lot of quotas, and they're restricted on time, so they don't always get the facts right.
Yes.
And I don't think that they don't want to be known as people who don't get the facts right because they're in journalism.
Sure.
But you just don't have the time.
Totally.
But it sounds like you have plenty of time.
Yeah. And
right.
and I think a lot of people write from a place of assumption, basically, or sometimes from a place of stereotype instead of going and actually
an unconscious bias, possibly.
Yeah, unconscious bias.
We'll
sure,
say this,
all
possibly.
those things. Yes, definitely. And you can't overcome those things unless you go and you talk to people for yourself. You see things yourself. I think in general, like as people in the world, it's easy to feel sure about things that you don't know very much about. Actually, once you start to learn a lot about them, your opinion becomes much more nuanced, right? You start to see things.
Everything's
differently.
nuanced.
Everything's nuanced.
True.
Yeah. So the main goal in my work is to achieve a place of nuance and to write about things as they really are, like by talking to people on all sides of an issue and really by going there and spending real time watching things play out for myself, like a good documentary does. And I think that's when you really, achieve stories that allow people to get to go beyond a place of like assumption and stereotype and actually learn about the real issues.
So you're a word documentarian.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to describe what I do.
Well, as a CEO and owner of multiple companies,
including a media company,
including Echelon, other tech companies, right? I want to make sure that my audience understands we're not friends. I mean, we're friendly.
I like you.
I like you
nice.
too. Yeah. But we don't know each other we don't have a long-term relationship.
No.
Right.
Yep. I'm just beginning reporting about what you guys do now. We just,
I met you through another media contact.
Yep.
And so in no way are you here to be biased or unobjective, right?
Totally true.
You might see us having some sense of banter, or I might have to protect you. You might even protect me because we're going to go on the streets.
Right.
But in no way should the audience feel that you're not here to tell the truth and be objective.
Sure. I should say, though, if I have to protect you, we're both in trouble. So
That's true.
Let's have you doing the protecting.
I like that.
Okay.
Okay. So I kind of want to leave it open to you to discuss what your goals are, kind of your mission and your goals.
Sure.
And then I want you to feel free to ask, because I want you to remain objective, so I don't really want to interview you. Why don't you interview me, and then afterwards we'll hit the streets and see what's going on.
That sounds great. I mean, so, in general, in my work lately, I've been writing a lot about, I think, things that you guys and people on your team on the street deal with every day, which is basically like the intersection of the homelessness crisis right now in this country, the fentanyl epidemic and the number of people dying, rising public safety concerns in a lot of big cities around the United States. And I wonder for you, when you were starting this, if some of those things were already in mind, if those issues were manifesting in ways that made you realize what the need was, or if some of it has even surprised you over the last few years in terms of what's been happening on the streets and what your team is encountering in Portland.
So, great question. I would say primarily that I knew.
Yep.
When I kind of transitioned in 2016, 2017, and prior to that, when I was in law enforcement, I was moonlighting in the security field. And in that time, I had met several other owners of security companies who were telling me, they're having a hard time hiring. And I was actually at a particular job where I was liaising for a large venue, concert venue. I was their liaison to law enforcement agencies.
Right.
Like we had some talent that was going to be on stage that night. They were on a national tour, and an agency came from another jurisdiction from another state. They had a warrant based on a criminal complaint of a sexual assault that happened in a tour bus.
Yep.
Right. And so, these types of things. And I'm also liaising with local law enforcement as well. And I could hear the grumblings of the lack or the inability to recruit effectively.
Yep.
And so that, and along with, I was on the board of the Fraternal Order of Police here in Oregon. The FOP, or the Fraternal Order of Police, is a national fraternal order. I think it's the first or second largest unionizer for law enforcement officers. So they come in and help you create a union to help you protect against your city.
Sure. Yeah.
They negotiate your contract with
you.
Yep. And
with private security companies, or just with
no, law enforcement.
Okay, just
in law enforcement. So being on the board of the FOP, it was constant. I mean, recruiting had been going down for almost a decade.
Wow. And is that because the jobs had become more dangerous? Like people feeling disempowered in their jobs, people feeling like they were working in communities that didn't want them to perform the roles that they were performing. I mean, what were the issues that was driving that?
I would say there were a lot of issues. I would say the overarching issue was just the lack of participation in things that would be considered civic duties or civic groups.
Okay.
VFW, Eagles Lodge, Elks Lodge, Mason Lodges.
All trending down.
Right. All trending down, right. Even participation on levels within certain areas of government, not just governmental bureaus, right? And trying to hire through those bureaus. I think that was trending down as well, in smaller jurisdictions specifically.
Yep.
And then, we've had a trend of urbanization where people grow up in smaller areas. They only need one or two kids to really stay on the farm, to inherit that farm. The other kids will go to college and get degrees, and they go to urban centers.
Sure.
And so that just all these trends merging together, this convergence of macro trends, I think led to the idea that, I need to work on myself, and not when you grow up in a smaller community and you know that community, you have a sense of civic duty because you're in the community you have an emotional attachment to.
Yep.
But when you grow up in rural Iowa and then you go to college at Stanford, but then you take a job in Portland in a suburb like Beaverton.
Yep.
I mean, where's your civic ties?
Sure.
Right. So
you don't feel connected to
you don't
anywhere.
feel connected. Lack of emotional attachment leads to the divestment.
Sure.
Right, of time and civic duties. And so to couple that, people are no longer staying in careers for 20 to 30 years at one place.
Yep.
Right. So they're no longer staying where they originally get their job. They're then taking, well, I'm going to get $12,000 or more a year here.
Yep.
So there's a lot of free agency. And again, I think all that attacks the ability to build that civic tie, that community group. I think the only people that are retaining these community groups are faith groups.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
And so people are staying active in their faith groups, Catholics, right? People like this. They're still connecting there, but they're not connecting to jury duty or the VFW or the Eagles Lodge, these things.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I mean, I guess I also wonder, like, you've seen some of these issues from a few different vantage points, right? You were in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. I've read some about that. I know there's some parts
it's
of
out
it
there.
that are, it's out there. And I know it was a really challenging and in some ways pretty horrific experience. But
it was definitely a learning experience.
Yeah. But I wonder, and you said you were doing some moonlighting even then, right? So you had a sense of the private security industry a little bit. But I wonder, especially because we've been talking about assumptions and how what I am often trying to do is get people beyond assumptions. What your notions were at that point about what private security was, and as you were just beginning to moonlight when you were in law enforcement, what your sort of perception of the industry was, and some of the problems with it, or the flaws with it, or the strengths of it.
So, excellent question.
Thank you.
You're an investigator.
That's right.
Investigative journalism, right here.
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know. I love it. So, So, or when I initially stepped into the security realm, I had a sense, and I think the sense is common for most people coming out of law enforcement, going into that industry, is that you see it's a false dichotomy.
Right.
We get trapped by this false dichotomy. People coming out of law enforcement going into the security world. And that is that there's really two tiers of security: observe and report.
Yep.
And that's for people who don't have experience,
Sure.
lack experience, or these things, right? And then there's the other industry, or the other part of the industry, which is it's a kind of a law enforcement-esque, right, or law enforcement light model, right? And that's what I saw.
Those two models.
Yeah, in fact, I was hired to be a liaison to law enforcement.
Yep.
They wanted someone who understood laws, who could determine whether law enforcement should get involved, because does a fight between a band members, is that civil or is that criminal?
Yep.
When does it arise to a criminal level that a venue could possibly be sued or have some type of concern that there would be an issue like that.
Sure.
And then they would be they would want to get law enforcement involved.
Yep.
And if they didn't, that could be seen as bad and right.
Yep.
And so
just to interject for a quick sense of perspective. So say in a city like Portland, what percent of private security or security jobs are sort of more that observe and report, and what percent are like the sort of law enforcement light, as you termed it nicely?
That's a really good question. So in Oregon, there's around 30,000 security guards.
Huge number.
Huge.
For
sworn officers in Oregon, it's like 4,500.
Wow. That's amazing to think about.
And I would say 85 to 90%, well, maybe 80%. The numbers are hard to find.
Sure. Because
if you drive a armored vehicle,
yep,
right, and you're a guard and you have a firearm, with the Department of Labor statistics, you're considered basically a driver, a teamster.
Okay.
And so the security realm is difficult to gather statistics on for this
reason. So
it's
probably even bigger than the 30,000 in some ways.
No, that's people who actually have licensed by the state of Oregon to provide security.
Okay.
Now there are a lot of moonlighters.
Sure.
And I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but to a lot of bouncers, this is very common to not have a certificate. And so, but yet in that 30,000, I would assume at least 15% are doing that law enforcement model.
Yep.
Versus the observe and report.
So the observe and report is the lion's share. I mean, that's by far the most.
And it's really a byproduct of the insurance insurance policies.
Okay.
Right. The insurance company is like, hey, you need to have security.
Yep. And when we think about observe and report, you know, this is probably my own stereotype, but I have an idea in my head of like somebody sort of standing in a uniform, maybe outside a building or outside
That's right.
a club or a restaurant, often unarmed, maybe sometimes armed, maybe with a taser or something like in the middle, and basically just that person's job is they're looking to see if something bad happens, and then they themselves are calling the police. Is that essentially what that role is?
They observe and they report.
Right.
They call 911, and so the reason that model doesn't work is because the lack of emergency services no longer allows that model to function healthily in a healthy way. Right.
Because they call and oftentimes nobody can respond no matter what. Yeah.
Another part of why that model really fails is there have been a lot of recent lawsuits that the companies are sued because they don't act.
Yep.
And so they'll say, like, when you're wearing a uniform, there's what is called implied authority. So even though you're not law enforcement, there's implied authority.
Right.
And that means that people are going to assume that you are going to act.
Yep.
Even in security, you don't have a duty to act, unlike law enforcement that does have a duty to act.
Got it.
Right?
Yep.
And so there was a case up in Washington State. And in Washington State, there was a very famous, typical unarmed service handling a transit contract.
Okay.
A group of individuals ran and beat up a lady, stole a purse, she dies. And it happens in front of the security guards.
Oh, jeez.
And they don't attempt to actually stop the assault.
Okay.
They just call
watch.
911 and watch. And so what happens during that situation, everyone sued everybody else.
Yep.
All the people involved in that guarding company lost their jobs. They sued and they won.
Yep.
They said,
because technically they were doing their jobs.
Hey, we did our job.
Yep.
Right. And then
maybe they did not exceed expectations.
Correct.
But
they were concerned.
They observed and they tried to report.
They were concerned they would get sued if they did anything above and beyond the
Right.
contract. And that used to be the case.
Yep.
And so the family of the victim sued, and everyone had to pay, even the guarding company.
Yep.
And then the guarding company sued the city or that whoever held that transit contract, right? And the guarding company won.
Wow.
Right.
Yep.
And then the city sued the guarding company, and then they won.
Yep.
And so everyone actually won, and then everyone lost at the same time. And so a lot of people are realizing because of these lawsuits that it's really not enough to observe and report. In fact, observe and report in Oregon is not even really a security function.
Right.
Like you can go on a fire watch. I can observe and call police. That's not really a security function. I'm not really doing anything.
Sure.
A private citizen can do that. So you don't need a security certificate to conduct that type of behavior.
Right. Yep.
Right. And
Yep. So I mean, obviously, then when you were thinking about, building this and what you wanted to do, I'm sure that some of the flaws of that observe and report model were in your head. You knew you wanted to create something much more proactive.
Not initially.
You didn't know initially. Okay.
I did not know initially.
Yeah.
I thought because I was prior law enforcement that when I observed and reported, it would be taken more seriously.
Sure. Something would happen.
It would be escalated as a real call.
Yep.
Because I've done death investigations and sex crimes and if that eventually dispatch would know who I was.
Yep.
Or they would know team members and hey, and then that's not the case.
Yep. And were there a few frustrating sort of learning moments where you realized like this is basically worthless? Like I don't want to be doing this observe and report model. I mean, early on when you didn't yet know, do you remember times where you just you would call or you would report and it was like nobody's home?
Yeah, all the time, every single time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it was one particular incident. I would say
it was all the incidents.
It was every single incident, and then the straw broke the camel's back.
Yep.
Right. And I don't want to talk about any particular. Well, we'll just say Portland.
Sure.
We're in a lot of other jurisdictions.
Yep.
But in Portland, they're only at around 35% force strength.
Right.
So the FBI has an FBI number, this many per capita, and they're at 1/3 of that recommended amount of policing per capita in an urban environment. They're only at 1/3 of that amount.
Wow.
So the officers are literally, they have an MDT or a system in their car with a screen
Yep.
with all their calls.
Yep.
And they're literally 8 calls down. And so, I mean, what are you going to do? You
Right.
have a security guard that says that he saw someone punch somebody.
Yep.
Okay, well, I got 6 shootings.
Yep. Yeah. I mean,
What do you do? You know what I mean?
sure, but you can't
And
do
I'm
it
not
all.
saying that we need more law enforcement.
Sure.
I want people to be clear. I'm not this gung ho pro law enforcement guy.
Right.
I think that we need a multidisciplinary approach. I've been writing about this for years. I think that law enforcement needs to change, and it's a paradigmatic change that needs to occur within law enforcement, similar to what happened with the fire departments.
Yep.
When they pulled the ambulances into the firehouse and they all became EMTs. I think a lot of this has to change.
Yep.
I think a lot of burdens have been placed upon law enforcement unduly, unnecessarily. There's no one else to take those mental health calls after we shut down all the state institutions after O'Connor v.
Right.
The O'Connor case in 1972. So we kind of got stuck with, in law enforcement, we got stuck with all these responsibilities.
Sure.
And really, we were never supposed to have these.
Yep.
Orderlies and doctors and nurses and medics, and there are so many other things that we do, and I think that we need to rethink how we do law enforcement.
Yep.
So
I mean, people probably see some of this, right, in these kind of videos, and particularly when they're out watching the work you guys do on the street. But I guess it would be helpful for me, even from like a macro level, to think about, like, so you step into this, basically this vacuum, I would say, like this empty space a little bit, where, in your company, where you have, so police officers, they have 8 calls waiting, on their screens that they can't get to. Ambulances, at least, in Portland, the city you referenced, often taking a very long time to respond, or sometimes the city being at level 0 with nobody able to respond, increasing mental health needs, basically a time where the demand for these services has gone up. The strains on
Correct.
Small businesses, parts of the community have gone up, but the ability of law enforcement to respond for a number of reasons has gone down, right? So it's like kind of this perfect storm where, like, you're going in and you're providing some version of part of that solution. And I guess I wonder if was it all sort of learned experience doing the job? Was it conversations with people? Was it looking at other models of, like, how do we proactively step into this space? I mean, how did you start to figure out, I want to build a company where we have, 24-hour patrols in parts of the neighborhood, where we're not just standing in front of places that hire us, but we're working in whole neighborhoods, and we're Narcanning people, and we're doing, like, how'd you land on that model, and how much time did that take?
it took about 6 months.
Okay.
My business partner, Reed Kerr, was integral in that development process. But basically, we said we need to keep doing what we're doing, but we need to pause and really take time to really think about this. We need to take a deep dive, stay down long,
Right.
and think. And during that 6-month period, we looked at probably 6 different things, right? One, we looked at, what is law enforcement really? What is law enforcement, right?
Yep.
And then we looked at, what is private security? What is that, right? And then we looked at, those kind of led to other areas. So we looked at, can private security be law enforcement, right? You have law enforcement who have to conduct investigations and arrest people.
Right.
Now, all those tiny little things are small civil rights violations that are illegal, ethical, and moral. We stop a car because they don't use an indicator or turn signal. So we're violating someone's rights for 12 minutes to ID them, give them a warning or a ticket, let them be on their way, right? But all that is escalatory because you're building. If I pull someone over for very something small,
Yep.
but I detect an odor of an alcoholic beverage emitting from the vehicle, well,
You're
then
going to the next level.
that is an extended stop,
Right.
Which is an extension of that constitutional violation,
Yep.
right? And then if I determine that there's probably, based on questioning, that something else, that they might have drugs or alcohol in their system, that then turns into field sobriety tests,
Yep.
which is another extension. If those tests indicate that individual is likely to be under the influence of an intoxicant, well, that's likely going to end up in an arrest, which is a continuance of that rights violation.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
And so what we realized is security should never act like law enforcement, which is crazy because 10 to 15% of the industry is acting like law enforcement.
Right. And the other, 85% is standing and reporting, or for the most part,
Observing and reporting.
observing and reporting.
Yeah, and so we said, hey, okay, so if we don't want to, and sometimes you have to make an arrest. If someone like is on a property and they're committing a major crime, you have to take them into custody so law enforcement can take them into custody. I mean, there are periods, there is a little bit of overlap, but primarily that action is not a rights violation. It's actually protecting someone's property rights or a person's rights, right? So if someone attacked you right now, I might take them into custody and call cops, but really I help save your life.
Sure.
And so saving your life is a civil rights action.
Right.
Does that make sense? So there are minority groups that hire our company because they receive hate crime or they receive notifications that they're likely to receive
threats and
hate crime against their property, right? And so we take on these contracts and we protect the right of these groups to worship or free speech in public spaces and private spaces.
Sure.
So a lot of this, what we determined was that as a security company, we're really more like a civil rights organization.
Right.
Like if we can really hold on to that as a value system and as an anchor, then we're really doing our job, and we're doing it, and we know why we're doing it.
Right.
We're not doing it because because we're quote unquote wannabe cops. We're doing it because we want to protect people's rights.
Right.
And that gives us a sense, and it gives every team member on our team the sense that we're doing something amazing for people. We're protecting people's rights and civil liberties.
Yep.
Right? And sometimes a lot of people on my team don't agree. We don't always agree with what rights are right.
Sure.
This is why we have Supreme Court and district courts and a federal district court and Supreme Courts of states. One of my clients has a Planned Parenthood, and they don't call law enforcement when people are harassing the females coming in and out, right?
Right.
They call us.
Yep.
And so sometimes we're protecting all these rights, and so that's really what we went for. But we also discovered that as a security company that's in a neighborhood, our job should be to decrease the amount of criminal occurrences.
Right.
But not to do that through the law enforcement model.
Right.
So it was like the fourth thing we looked at.
Okay.
Because we want crime to decrease.
Sure.
Because we're protecting people.
Right.
We want to protect your right to own a vehicle.
Sure.
We want to protect your right for you to go outside and enjoy private space.
Right.
Right. And so how do you do that? How do you, if you're not law enforcement and you don't want a law enforcement model, how do you decrease crime?
Right.
Right. Well, we realized the way you decrease crime is through community engagement. As engagement goes up in a neighborhood, the criminal element will consider that more risky to conduct business in that area, and that criminal element will decrease, and therefore crime occurrences decrease.
Yep.
And so what we said, well, how do we get people in the streets in order to make that shift? And again, it's like the civil rights movement. So when we wanted a change in civil rights, what did we do? We took it to the streets.
Right.
Right? This is why protesting is actually a very effective form of redress against the government, because you're owning space. And in that, during that ownership of that space, it's very hard for entities to commit crimes or civil rights violations or any type of abuse, because you're owning it with witnesses. So we said, we're going to engage the community and get the community out. Sometimes we even do barbecues. Like we did a barbecue on July 4th. We fed 517 persons in a very disaffected area. Yep. People living on the street.
Right.
But when that happened, our call volume for that entire district plummeted. During an extremely hot day on a summer day, when we would typically get 20, 30 calls, we got 5.
Yep. And that's because people had something positive to do.
Correct.
They had a place to be.
And they were engaged.
There were other people around, right?
And they were engaged with people that have eyeballs.
Yep. And when you say your call volume, I mean, is that those are clients who recognize, hey, something's happening at our building, outside our business, whatever else, and they call.
Person A is punched person B in the face
Right.
in front of that business. They're blocking that door. They're fighting, physically fighting, and I have customers who can't leave the store.
Right. Yep.
Can you come check it out?
And they're calling you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess now.
So that day, less incidents occurred.
Right.
Because as community engagement increased, incident levels dropped.
Yep. So is that, I mean, taking it to the streets, as you put it, like sort of becoming increasingly proactive and going out into neighborhoods. Is that over the last year, 2 years? I mean, how long ago did you guys really go all in?
So
on
this
that
is something
direction?
I've always done.
Yep.
I've always been, I used to work with nonprofits 20 years ago, a long time ago. And then I did it a lot in the military. And what I've learned throughout my short life is that when you engage communities, that is de-escalatory.
Right.
Right. When community increases, that de-escalates an entire community. So rather than trying to de-escalate one person on one incident, we're de-escalating an entire community.
Yep.
By creating community.
Sure.
By creating a network of relationships and friendships that give the opportunity for communication to occur for mass de-escalation.
Sure.
Right. The UN does this.
Right.
That's like the fifth thing we looked at: overseas operations. We looked at U.S. aid. We looked at Band-Aid. We looked at how groups like NATO or UN step in and deconflict areas like Rwanda.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And now you have Rwanda. Sure, in these areas you might have some ethnic issues, but there isn't a complete genocide going on.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like in Serbia and Bosnia, Herzegovina. So you have all these areas, right? And if you apply the right pressure and you force community into an area, not force, but if you support right, community in an area, the results are actually dramatically, it's amazing.
Yep.
It really is.
I wonder, I mean, just because it is, there's something novel in that approach. If it's been hard, like if explaining that to your clients is challenging, or if they intuitively get it, or if they have to see first. So like say for instance, I'm a small pizza shop in a certain neighborhood of Portland that's having a hard time, and my windows have been broken 6 times in the last year, and I've got people sleeping outside, and it's detracting from the customer experience, and so I say, you know what, I've heard great things about Echelon. I'd love to work with them. And I can imagine people who weren't used to this model, they might say, well, we've hired you, and I see your guys spending a lot of time in this encampment that's 6 blocks away and doing a lot of work there, but nobody's standing in front of the pizza shop enough, right? Like I wonder if you have to explain this to those places, or if they get it, or they see in the results. I don't know.
So you have to do both.
Yeah.
You have to explain it, but they also see the results, and there's always a balance between how much quote unquote nonprofit NGO style work we perform versus taking calls and being effective and showing up in 3 or 4 minutes.
Sure.
So to get back to the business model, and this is really the 6th thing, what we realize is security isn't security unless it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right.
In America, we have a 7.5 minute response time for law enforcement. In Portland, it's around 15 minutes.
Okay.
Right. So if there's an incident and we can't respond in under 7 minutes, then we're failing.
Right.
Right. Because in order for a community to be engaged, you have to have short response times.
Yep.
And so that's why we went with the district model. The district model helps, and there's an economy of scale. Number one, it's cheaper for the client, but number two, it provides 24 hours, 7 days of service. So in the explanation to get back to the question, I had to chase that rabbit, folks.
Sure. Yeah.
Sometimes
absolutely.
there are rabbits that need to be chased.
I get it.
There's carrots that have to be bartered with and holes to be dove into. So to get back to your original question, when you go to explain to the client the overall business model, they get it.
Yep.
Because these all make sense. I can't tell you how many people said, well, I just need security at night. I don't need security during the day. My windows are only being broken at night.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, but the person breaking your windows is probably walking by your business like 5 times during the day.
Sure.
And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, well, and you're going to just contact them during the day? And I said, yeah, because we want to build community. And it's hard to build community in the middle of the night when a guy's coming up to you in a uniform and they look all scary.
Sure.
Right? And so daytime is for community building and nighttime is for protection. Protecting property rights, protecting persons' rights. You don't have the right to punch this guy in the face.
Right.
because I'm here to help him.
Yep.
Right. And so without that balance, without that daytime, nighttime balance, it's impossible to get the results you need because you can't deliver the entire service.
Yep. So in the neighborhood that we're about to go see,
Old Town,
Old Town, Portland. Yeah, I mean it's a phenomenal neighborhood. I also live here, but also a neighborhood that's kind of been at the epicenter of a lot of the challenges we've been talking about. So in a neighborhood like that, who are your clients? How many do you have? What kinds of places are they? What sort of diversity of kind of city life are you guys representing over there?
Great question. So we have a lot of clients, about probably 70 clients, right? And some of them, we don't always just take the big clients. But you got to take everybody, and you have to make it affordable for everybody, or it doesn't work. If you can't get the entire community engaged, it takes a longer time to deliver results, and it's harder to maintain that level of safety.
Yep.
Right. And so, yeah, we have clients that are small time businesses, mom and shops or mom and pop shops, whatever you want to call them. Right. And so, we have like these little delis. We got, I don't know, like a museum or something, right?
Sure.
Very little foot traffic, and they pay a very minimal amount, but they're engaged.
Right.
Their clients are engaged, and they're looking out their windows, and they're making calls.
Yep.
Right. So we got a snitch on every block.
Sure.
But we have multiple snitches on every block.
Because,
right?
Old Town's we're not talking about a huge neighborhood. If you have 70 places in that, that's a lot of coverage.
In one block, we could have 5 clients.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And so that's how it works. You have this tiny little salon, or in some buildings, you have multiple businesses officing out of that building, and we'll have those as individual clients.
Yep.
Right. And it's really, but when let's say in one building we have 3 or 4 clients, but they're all going to be parking at different times.
Right.
Because they all have different work schedules. And so they're all filtering that intelligence, that communication, whatever's going on in the neighborhood, that intelligence is filtering up, right? And it's allowing us to then respond to calls and identify people and stay on top of everything.
Yep. Yeah.
Right? It's feeding in real time.
Totally. I mean, this is probably hard to quantify. And so I guess I'm more asking for a sense than anything beyond that. But 10 years ago in Portland, say, or 10 years ago really in Albuquerque or Seattle or any of the other places where you guys are working. I guess, and I again could be wrong, but my own assumption would be that the nail salon in Old Town 10 years ago didn't maybe need this in the same way. Like the need wasn't as high.
No, the need's higher now.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm asking is like
Portland,
those 70 places in Old Town.
Chicago's always been Chicago.
Sure.
Since the Chicago mob.
Right.
I mean, let's just be honest here. New York's always been New York. A lot of things. So what people don't realize is crime is cyclical. Obviously, you know this, but crime is cyclical. It's generational, right?
Yep.
It tracks population growth. It also tracks the growth of industries, right? And so in Portland, what you had was what I loved about Portland was it was really what in Europe you'd call a village.
Right.
It wasn't really a city. It was a city, but it was a city that was like pristine and perfect and low crime. And it was almost like a cathedral village, like in Scotland or like in France somewhere, right?
Yep.
Kind of far off from the big cities where the professional criminal elements were not aware of. There was no one out there running numbers. Or like taking bets, right?
Yeah.
There was no one out there in that game doing that thing, part of that life, feeding off of the population.
Right.
And over the past 10 years, Portland has graduated from that pristine cathedral village that you would find out in the middle of the Netherlands to a major city.
Right.
With major city problems like New York, Houston, LA,
sure.
Atlanta, Miami, right? You have legitimate, when I went through my gang training, right, in law enforcement, I was told by my instructor that there are no nationally recognized gangs that operate in the state of Oregon.
Wow.
Meaning, like, sure, you have the biker
club.
Club.
Some local factions, but not.
Yeah, you have the biker club that that lost to the California Biker Club, and they were forced to move up here in the 60s, and this is their territory now.
Right.
And they're the head of the Council of Clubs, and you have that, but you don't have like a street gang that's a rolling 60s street gang that's paying dues to a 60s Crip gang or some type of gang in LA.
Yep.
Like that wasn't occurring, right? And they weren't sending people in to give advice, or there was no ebb and flow of information either.
Right.
It was just people just said, "Oh, rolling 60s, that's cool. I'm gonna call myself a rolling 60." And they were little guys got together and they were rolling 60s.
Yep.
But they really weren't.
Yep.
Now you have legitimate criminal organizations that have moved in to Oregon and have claimed that territory.
Yep.
And part of that is traffic. It's easier to travel than it was 30, 40 years ago.
Sure.
Right? A lot of that is the policies that have occurred over those several decades.
Yep. And in Old Town, for instance, this neighborhood that we're going to go see here in a few minutes, what percent of not just the calls that you get, but I guess like your clients' concerns trace back to, you know, these sort of epidemics of the moment that I was talking about at the very beginning, and that I spend a lot of time writing about, like the homelessness crisis, the fentanyl and sort of opioid epidemic writ large, the mental health situation right now in the country. Like how much of what you're hearing about in Old Town traces back to that and to the organized crime around those things?
So that's a really good question. I think the majority of people that make calls are people that are, I don't think a lot of them know that they're reporting crimes or not crimes.
Right.
Because I think the average citizen isn't walking around with a criminal code in their head.
Sure.
Kind of like probably you are now and I am.
Right.
Because of my training. I think what they're reporting is abnormal behavior, or what they perceive to be abnormal behavior.
Which is often probably mental health crises.
Yeah. Or, there's a guy, he's been digging in this backseat of this car and the window looks broken.
Right.
I don't know if he owns the car. I don't know if he broke into the car.
Sure.
It just seems odd.
Yep.
Right. Those are the typical phone calls.
Yep.
Oh, there's a guy. He's waiting at the back door of a building. I think he has a tool in his hand.
Right.
But it could be the handyman.
Sure.
Actually, I think, gosh, he kind of looks like the handyman, but I don't know.
Right.
Maybe you should check it out.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And so they're seeing something that's an abnormal behavior.
Right.
And that's why calls are so hard to triage and understand. Unless it's like, hey, someone just stabbed someone in the neck.
Right. Yep.
And you're like, check, en route.
Right.
So these abnormal general calls, they're just saying, hey, there's a behavior happening. And I grew up in West Lynn. And I just moved to downtown Portland like 2 years ago. And it's really odd.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And so I had to chase that rabbit.
Yep.
But to get back to your answer, like I would say 100% of the calls are for this reason.
Yep.
Because there are so many. Portland is a city that has embraced an extreme form of libertarianism when it comes to freedom of speech, freedom of religion. I mean, there was a giant church rally just the other day.
Right.
I mean, they really allow people to do whatever they want. Right. You can do yoga naked. You can,
and a lot of drug decriminalization as well.
Yeah, exactly. Extreme forms of libertarianism.
Right.
Right. Where there's marijuana is legal. Narcotics has been decriminalized on a personal use level. And so when people see things, when someone if I grew up and I never saw someone smoke meth and look high, I would call that in as odd behavior.
Right.
And that's what's happening.
Yep.
And this is overwhelming not just us, but 911 or BOEC or these communication centers that deal with these issues. And so it's I'd like to get back to your question. It's really everything.
Yep.
And obviously meth psychosis, all these things, it's always a problem. It's always going to end up in some type of call.
Yep, totally. Well, I could sit and talk to you here all day, and I probably will.
You're really good at it.
I could probably continue to do that. I will over the next week.
The New York Times should give you a podcast.
Hey, there we go. We've got a lot of podcasts.
I know.
A whole audio app.
Yeah,
you can promo the audio app.
I love it. Yeah.
But yeah, and when I'm done writing the story about like you guys and what you guys do, that'll be on the audio app. People can listen to it
That's
instead
awesome.
of reading it. But yeah, I mean, I'm also just really excited to go out there and see it, and watch sort of this district model at this moment unfold in places where the need is so high. So thanks for letting me tag along for it.
Let's roll out then. Let's go.
Sweet.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yep. See you on the streets.
All right. Looking forward to it. Where do you guys? Where's the boundary between Old Town and downtown?
Broadway.
Broadway and what? So like,
Pearl District is to our right. This is
Yep.
the Pacific Northwest College of Arts. Old Town is to the left.
okay.
And look, here's the guy running a chop shop.
Yep.
There you go.
Are there certain pockets of Old Town that are that end up producing like more calls and more issues, or it's pretty much well spread throughout?
Yeah, I would say the mass transit areas,
Yep.
because the majority of the calls are usually drug related,
Yep.
whether it's some type of drug-induced psychosis, or whether it's people arguing about drugs, whether it's a stabbing or shooting about drugs, right?
Yep.
Well, whatever. And the quickest and easiest way to sell dope is to be on a mass transit line.
Yep.
Whether like Broadway, easy street, you come right off of the bridge, boom, you drop in, you can hit another street and drop out.
Yep.
Transit, easy, you jump off, you jump on, and you're gone.
Yeah.
Right?
Of your calls, how many do you think eventually end up involving police, or that's pretty rare?
I would say maybe 2%.
Wow. So it's a very small volume.
Yeah, we're really taking the calls. We're taking a lot of de-escalatory calls.
Right.
We're working on de-escalation.
Yeah.
And and if there's a real crime, we're definitely going to call the cops, because we're not the police.
Sure.
Right? I would say the majority of calls don't warrant a law enforcement response.
Yeah.
Even in 911.
Yeah.
Right? It could be a medical issue. Now, if there's a medical issue, hey, there's a guy here, it looks like he's passed out, we take it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we want them to call an ambulance, but we're like usually right there.
Yeah.
So we'll Narcan them, and medics will show up, and then they'll take them.
Got it. And your guys stay in until the ambulance arrives. Like you're Narcaning somebody and then waiting. Yep.
Yeah, well, you have to stay with them, because Narcan.
Well, and sometimes you need a lot of it. I mean,
Sometimes you need a lot of it, but Narcan in the human body has a shorter shelf life than the new designer drugs coming out of China.
Got it.
So you can, if you Narcan them,
they can come out of it. You can think they're okay, and then boom,
they walk away, and 5 minutes later they overdose again. But the problem is, they're like, I'm good, and that it's a vice. You can't stop them from leaving,
right.
But we notify them, hey, I know you think you're good, but I just did chest compressions on you, and you were like talking to the ancestors, bro.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like you were
and you think
you were communing with the dead.
I mean, your team is Narcaning somebody every day in the city.
I would think so. Sometimes no, because again, it's cyclical.
Right.
What batch is on the street right now? You might get a really.
This is an Old Town.
Yeah, this is what is called the pit, not by us, but by people who live here.
Yeah.
All right, man. So we're no longer in studio. We're actually in the streets. Shit can get kind of crazy. So you can walk away at any point.
Appreciate that.
You don't have to engage. And remember, we do not have a duty to act. We're just trying to make shit safe.
Yep.
Okay. You're not wearing a vest. You're cool with that.
Yeah.
We've talked about that. You're gonna.
I've got a notebook and a pen.
The pen
the
is mightier
tools
than
in
the
my
sword.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay, great. We're gonna hook up with Jacobson, last names only.
Okay.
We're gonna. You'll be able to talk to him, interview him, and the area we're going to used to be one of the highest call volume properties before we took it over. Now it's a lot more chill, but shit could pop off.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Sounds good. How long has Jacobson been working with you guys?
About 2 years.
Oh, great.
Yeah. He's a coordinator, community coordinator, so he's a supervisor.
Hey, how are you? I'm Eli.
Man.
Nice to meet you. Great.
Cool.
Nice to meet you
What's up,
too.
bro? You want to roll?
Absolutely.
All right.
You said patch.
Yeah.
In the last
In
month.
the last month, there's been 3 or 4 dudes who have required a fair amount of naloxone and CPR to come back to life.
Yeah.
I mean, what I've heard in other cities and some here is that also like the average number of doses required has really gone up lately.
It's
Like,
gone way up. We stopped carrying the 4 milligram Narcans, and now we're carrying 8 milligram Cloxidos because
Okay.
it takes almost twice as much
Wow.
to get people to come back.
And how many of the 8 milligrams are you having to hit some of these people with?
Generally, it's 2 8 milligrams and sometimes a 4.
Wow. And is that, I mean, every neighborhood in the city? Or are those 3 or 4 concentrated?
It's predominantly Old Town and downtown. Every so often you come across one in Goose Hollow, but
Okay.
typically.
I was asking Alex about this, but I mean, you know, you're at the shift meetings and everything else. I mean, would you say that across the company, you guys are Narcanning somebody every day?
Probably not every day, but I would say at least 2 to 3 times a week.
Okay.
It comes up. I think our most recent one was on Saturday.
Okay. And predominantly Old Town, downtown, like the main.
Yeah, predominantly your main areas.
Yeah. I'm guessing also occasionally witnessing people who, you know, who you're too late to save. Like, has that been has death become a bigger part of it?
You know, I'm fairly happy to say that I have not had to have anyone not make it under me
Yeah.
yet.
Good. That's great.
That's pretty amazing.
There's been a couple of dudes who've been, we'll say, circling the drain a little bit,
Got it.
but we've always been able to get them to come back
Yeah.
after a while. Generally right around the time ambulances show up, they're waking back up.
Yeah.
So.
But it sounds like you guys often are beating the ambulance there.
Yeah, well, we come across them. The ambulances don't go out and patrol. They have to be called there.
Right.
Exactly.
So we come across them, you know, every so often somebody will just kind of point one out and just sort of be like, hey, there's a guy in this parking lot who is just laying here.
Yeah, and I would say because you know everything's switched from meth to opiates or synthetic opiates. There's so many people in a daze or asleep that few and few people are calling these types of things in. I mean, they're not really seeing.
Right.
They're just seeing someone passed out.
Yeah.
No one really knows if they're going to die or not. So.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
hard to recognize the
Yeah.
signs of overdose for people who aren't, you know, trained on it. That's why we.
That's right.
That's why we have so many trainings on it, so
Well,
that we
also, I
make
imagine-
sure that we know what we're looking for.
Right. It's also become increasingly normalized for like people passing by on the street. They might just not react.
It's
that
become
way.
so normalized that one of the most recent dudes who I had to give Narcan CPR to, by the time I came across him, he had already been given 1 dose of Narcan by another homeless person.
Oh, wow.
Who carries it for when they overdose.
Right. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Did he travel from that location to a new location?
No, he was just in that parking lot doing his thing, and then the dude fell over, and he
saw
walked
somebody
over and Narcaned him once, and that didn't work, so he came and got us, who were
Yeah. Wow.
standing across the street.
So when you go out on patrol, or like when you're, you know, starting your shift, what do you have on you right now? I mean, Alex has talked about sometimes you guys might be handing out cigarettes. It's Narcan. It's like, do you have stuff in your car? to
So
deal
on
with-
me, I have cigarettes, I have Narcan and other medical supplies. With me in my vehicle, we have resource totes that are provided to us by loving one another. And that's got food, it's got you know, hygiene supplies, we have cases of water that we carry around, shelf-stable food, sometimes there's clothing.
Sometimes dog food.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
we do come across a lot of homeless people who have their pets, and for a lot of them, it's almost more important to ensure that their pet eats than them.
Sure.
As bad as it is to say humans can eat dog food. So.
That's right.
Right. And also on you right now, like for your own personal safety, like what else are you carrying? Flashlight?
Flashlight's essential. Personal safety-wise, I've got pepper spray and a firearm.
Right.
I have carried a taser in the past, but I feel like it's just a little bit more of an aggressive show of force than I need.
Okay.
I'm not somebody who gets into really heated engagements with people. I'm generally pretty good at talking them down.
Sure.
So
I mean, it sounds like de-escalation is probably a huge part of the job.
de-escalation is the biggest part of the job. De-escalation, compassion, and relationship building, that's all it's about.
Yeah. Did you know that going in, or like?
You know, it was told to me in all the hiring process, but I really truly didn't understand the scope of it until I started working. Like most of the officers here, obviously I came from a more traditional security background where it's more just, you know, if there's somebody, they need to leave.
Right.
And that's kind of all there is to it. So working here taught me a whole lot about, you know, how to talk with people, how to build relationships with people. Going through the city for as long as I can, it's you know, it's created some very interesting perspectives. It's interesting to go out and contact people and to always remain humble and remain aware that, like, I'm way closer to being that guy than I ever will be to being the guy who pays me to kick people off of their building.
Sure.
I you know,
Yeah.
so they truly are, like, it's all the community.
Is it like, and I guess I wonder this question for you too, Alex, in terms of
Yeah, sure.
company-wide, but like,
I'm just running. I'm looking around doing security while y'all are talking to me.
Sure, that's good. I'm not doing that, so I'm glad you are. I mean, do you run into compassion fatigue, or do you worry about it, or do you do things to like protect against it? I mean, just kind of like guarding your own empathy when you're seeing a lot of human suffering every day.
You know, you just sort of have to remind yourself that you're doing everything that you can.
That's right.
You know, obviously there comes a certain point where you can't help anyone.
Let's hold up here for a second.
Yeah.
It's good to hold up on a corner because it gives you two angles. Does that make sense?
Get a sense of what's going on. Yep.
So I can see all the way down to the end. If I see something frantic or odd, abnormal, that gives me, I'm pretty much covering half of the property,
Right.
the perimeter right now, by holding up on a corner and just chilling, just being part of the community, hanging out, saying hi. Hey, what's up?
And this is a big property.
Pretty big property, yeah.
One of
Several
our
square
larger
blocks.
apartment complexes,
Yeah,
Yeah. How many units? Do you guys have any sense?
400 or 500 maybe.
Okay.
Something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So you were saying you remind yourself that you're doing all you can.
You do all you can. There's a certain point where you can't do anything anymore. There's a certain point where it becomes up to the individuals to meet you halfway on help. And if they don't want to, that's their choice, and it's not
right.
going to stop me from reaching out
Sure.
and doing what I can. I mean, you develop relationships with people, and you start to realize that a lot of them are out here because of decisions that they continue to make.
Right.
And that's okay. They're people and they're members of the community, and they're still deserving of compassion and resources.
Yep. Yeah. Now doing security this way, when you think back on like the previous ways that you did it, has it changed your perspective on that too? Like, does that seem
100%. There's no more effective method than this. Like that, I've never had any sort of job that even encouraged me to build connections with the individuals that I'm
Right.
contacting. It's quite literally just, you are here, you are a person, and you need to leave.
Right.
This is the first time I've ever been encouraged to build a relationship with them. I mean, I would say that at this point in my life, I know and regularly associate with more homeless people than I do non-homeless people
Right.
on a daily basis.
Because that's, I mean, I'm guessing a very large percentage of the people you're dealing with on your shift, right? I mean, especially right now
I mean,
in terms of.
you get non-homeless individuals. We get a lot of people coming up, just asking for directions,
Sure.
asking for advice, asking for where certain things are. But I'd say the vast majority of people I'm talking with, not only are they homeless, but they're people who I've now known for years. So
Yeah.
It's become not so much a security guard and transient relationship so much as it's just sort of the game we're all playing. I hardly even have to ask people to leave anymore. You just
Sure.
kind of walk up and say, "Hey, what's up, guys?" And they go, "Yeah, we'll be out of here in 10 minutes."
Right.
We go, "That sounds great. Thank you very much."
it's just community members respecting each other's needs, really, at that point.
I mean, there's no shortage of people replying, "Hey, thanks for being cool about it. Hey, we appreciate what you do." Like
Right.
it is fully and completely just different aspects of the community doing what they do.
Yep. And like in a given shift, I mean, how much of your time are you responding to calls? How much of your time is sort of like more proactively patrolling?
I'd say it's probably about 15 to 20% call response.
Okay, wow.
80% proactive patrol.
Okay.
Seeing that proactive.
Obviously, they can get busier, but the thing about being proactive on patrol is you start to come across the issues that somebody would call about
Yeah.
before they call about them. honestly no greater feeling than dispatch sending out a call and saying, hey,
Yeah,
you got a call
it
for
is.
society, and you're like, I'm here.
Right.
I'm on site
Already-
dealing with
already
it.
on
Yeah.
the spot.
Yeah.
And is like,
And that free time, that non-call time, allows you to build relationships,
right.
right? I mean,
I would say
And when you're patrolling, are you in the car? Are you on foot? Is it like a combo?
You know, I generally start my shift in the car. You drive through the district and see where problem areas are, and you park and you walk. I'd spend probably a good 60 to 70% of my time walking. You know, I have specific ways that I do my patrol. I don't really kick people out of places before like 11:30.
yeah.
Because chances are, you know, a guy sitting there smoking a cigarette at 8:30, if you don't talk to him, he's going to be gone at 8:45.
Right.
It's not worth making him feel aggressed. It's not worth
That's
making him feel like he's doing something wrong for existing.
Right.
I generally don't start to kick people out of places until either they're making a mess and, you know, disrespecting the property, causing a safety hazard for people, or they're inviting a large amount of illegal activity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for the most part, somebody sleeping in front of a door, I will give them until well into the night before I actually have them move. Granted, I'll talk to them at the beginning of the night. I'll swing by them at 8 p.m. and just sort of be like, hey man, I can't have you here all night. I'm gonna check on you throughout the night. You know, come
Yeah.
later in the morning, I am gonna have to ask you to move. And generally they're gone by the time I check on them again, but if they're not, they're all very respectful about moving because I gave them ample warning that it was
Yep.
going to occur.
Yep. Yeah. Is it like, Alex and I have been talking about this a lot, but you patrol in a lot of different districts. You have a pretty good sense of the city.
Yes.
I guess I just wonder, over the last 2 years in this job, but even going further back than that in other jobs, how you've seen sort of the landscape of some of these, like, you know, major endemic societal problems change in Portland, whether it's like the fentanyl crisis, homelessness issues, you know, public safety, mental health. Like if you feel like you've seen some changes in the place.
Oh, absolutely. So I moved up to Portland in 2018, so
Okay.
pre-COVID. My first year of living up here, I used to just come to downtown and walk around just because, you know, play Pokemon Go
Right.
or, you know, just go shopping. Then obviously the pandemic hit and I was down here for work, you know, doing things with the riots and stuff like that, protecting against stuff like that. And it, late 2020, I was definitely able to witness Portland become essentially closed down, essentially one giant homeless encampment.
Right.
And then since working here, since 2021 and on, it's very interesting. I'll take ride-alongs around. They'll be like, "Hey, wow, you know, Portland looks great. Like it's actually starting to look better." And it's cool to be able to be like, "Yeah, you know, I can take credit for that."
Right.
Yeah.
We did
100%.
that. We did that.
We did that. We did. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Downtown Portland looks as good as it does right now.
Other people did it with
because
us,
of- Of course.
but we definitely were part of. We were trying to lead the way. We
I
definitely
feel
tried
like
to
we
lead
were
the
the
way.
first ones out here saying, you know, maybe if you just get to know them, they would move
Yeah.
from out in front of your business.
Yeah.
If you gave them an idea of a place to go and some
Yeah.
resources to take with them. And other companies in the city are starting to catch on to that.
I think
know
so.
Northwest Enforcement
Yep.
is starting to carry around resources.
Clean and safe.
Yeah, Clean and Safe is always
They
been
work with Bybee Lakes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
it not only is it
mean-
nice to be leading the charge, but it's nice to see other organizations in Portland kind of taking up the mantle and sort of
Totally.
being like, hey, you know, this is achievable. You don't just have to be
Yeah.
Echelon to get this done.
Correct.
I know this will be sort of a guess, but how many security organizations are working in Greater Portland? I mean, dozens?
More than dozens.
I would say
hundreds.
1,000,
Yeah.
1,000.
maybe 400 to 500, maybe 1,000. I don't. Individual. So I can have a manager's contract. I'm on the board at Department of Public Safety.
Right.
For security. So you can be a sole proprietor, PI, and take a contract.
Okay.
So a lot of these people are 1099 sole proprietors with their own manager's certificate.
Yep.
So dude, there's definitely hundreds.
Wow.
There's definitely hundreds.
There are larger players that obviously you come across more frequently, but I can't tell you how often I'll meet another security guard and I'll look at their arm or their badge and just sort of be like, I don't even know what company that is. Like,
Because there are just so many.
There are just so many.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone needs them at this point.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, people bouncing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all of those are going to be private contractors.
Yep.
And they have their own manager certificate, hopefully.
So it's just been interesting seeing the company grow. I mean, we've always been based here at
Yeah.
the yards,
Yeah.
but we've expanded just from right here all the way into the point where you go into the middle of Old Town. It's sort of an everything the light touches is my kingdom
Yeah.
sort of situation.
Yeah.
We've
Cool.
seen most of the yards. Why don't we head
Yeah.
that way?
Why don't we
can
go see
here.
some more?
Yeah.
So, you're working days and you're handing off at night, or you're working nights, or you
I work
swing
nights.
shifts? Okay.
I work nights. I work 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Okay.
You don't want to see me during the day. I'm a zombie.
and
right.
you like nights?
Yeah, no, nights is what I've always preferred.
Noah's married to the nights.
I am.
Really?
You know, it's interesting. When I was getting into security, I started on days, and then I had a few nights jobs that I had a lot of trouble staying awake for. I was even let go from a company once for falling asleep at the desk because I could not stay engaged with the job. I have never had a problem with that here.
Well, because you're out and about
'Cause
more and
I-
interacting.
It's engaging.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
I got into security to help people, and I didn't really know what that meant, other
check
than
that.
like I just want to be helpful.
Right.
And so I've
Have
always
it.
gravitated towards, I started with concierge type jobs. I worked at Nike. I worked in the life safety dispatch office at Intel.
Yep.
And so that was helping people, but I never
But a little
truly-
more distance from the ground.
Yeah, I never truly understood what security could do for people until getting into this job. It's really interesting. Every
Yeah.
so often, people don't like people who look like this, and they'll argue like, why are you trying to be a wannabe cop? Why are you trying to do this? And it's real quite simple. I figured out a long time ago that
Do you
my
have gloves?
opportunities. Do I have gloves? Yeah, absolutely.
It's a baggie.
You figured out a long time ago that your
I figured out a
opportunities-
long time ago that my opportunities to help people are significantly greater with this job.
So
than
that
they
could have
ever would
fentanyl
be.
in it. A
you
kid
glove
could grab that and get really messed up,
Yep.
right? If I send you that, will you do the report on that?
Sure, absolutely. Baggie of fentanyl at the yards.
It was brown substance. Yeah.
Baggie of unknown brown substance at the yards.
Probably just
I'm
sugar.
not an investigator.
Just brown
I
sugar,
cannot
bro.
determine.
Brown sugar in that bag.
Yeah.
You never know.
So a neighbor bringing a little brown sugar over for somebody's
Never
oatmeal.
know.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt y'all.
No,
you're
no
totally
worries.
fine.
So Noah, is it the same number of people on during the day, essentially?
No,
Like,
the
or
day
it's pretty
shift is
different?
is a little bit smaller. I would say day shift has about 9 to 10 officers working.
Got it.
The demands of day shift and night shift are a lot different. They both serve the mission extremely well, but day shift is a lot more client facing. Businesses are open.
Yeah.
It's a lot more.
What's up, baby?
How you doing?
Good to see you, bro. How you been?
Good, man.
Remember me?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank you, man.
I want to interview you soon.
Yeah, I know. You know.
All right, brother. One love. So
Come and go.
this guy was homeless, and we helped him get his unit here.
Oh, cool.
We've actually paid his first month's rent, and so he's struggling. He's like a couple $100 short on this month's rent.
Okay.
He's been doing really, really well. He's full-time working hard. So that's what that was about.
Where was he homeless?
Here in Portland, Old Town.
Just right here. Wow.
Yeah. So he's
We've
been living here
with a lot
for.
of people. Remember James Harmon?
Yeah.
We did everything we could to keep him here.
Iraq vet. We'll run into him eventually.
I think you mentioned him to me.
Yeah.
Just
I
somebody
see
who's
him
had a
every
very
couple
hard
days.
time for a long time.
There's no reason the VA doesn't have him. He needs to be in an institution and he needs to get regulated over a 3 to 6 month period.
What neighborhood is he staying in? Or
Old
he's-
Town.
He's in Old Town.
Old Town.
And so whoever's patrolling Old Town knows
We know him.
Knows him well.
We know him very well. I've known him for about as long as I've been with the
Oh, yeah.
company. When I first started, he lived here at
Yeah.
the yards. And then I was one of the responding officers on the assault call, which got him no longer
Correct.
living at the yards.
He thought there were snipers on the roof.
He sure did.
Oh, jeez.
He's
I mean,
an
the
Iraq
most.
veteran.
It's not.
And now
it's not a
he's in the
great
pit, or he's
situation for
just
him.
he's
He is usually around Lansing Chinese Garden Society Hotel.
okay. Yeah.
Last
kinda
time I
weird.
saw him was on the 4th of July. He was running down Broadway with a big old knife in his hand.
That sounds about right.
4th of July is a rough time.
And this dude has
Yeah.
free
for
medical,
this
bro.
city.
Yeah.
The VA we'll take care of him, bro. It's just like,
I mean,
So-
I met
so
an
that's-
individual last night
that's-
over at University of Oregon who's only been homeless for 4 days, and he's been trying to get in contact
Yeah.
with the VA for 4 days.
Yeah.
Being like, I just lost my house.
Where are
I
you?
don't use
Yeah.
drugs. I'm just trying to not be a 74-year-old man who lives on the street.
That's right.
And the VA will not pick up their phone.
No.
They have put him on an indefinite wait list.
I,
And so
I knew
ended
a
up having to
suicidal
walk him
veteran
over
who
to
is
City
still
Team.
waiting to get care.
Yeah.
So,
He's
so,
waiting 30 more than 30 days to get care.
somebody like
I gotta check, bro.
somebody like James, whoever's in Old Town every day and every night is probably putting eyes on him at some point. And like all the things, what are all the things that you guys have done in a situation like that? Okay, so take James. You have somebody that you know is suffering and also causing a lot of occasionally alarm, obviously, like in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
What, other than putting eyes on him every day, like what are the various things you're trying to do to get him help, or the various things you try in that situation?
Personally, I find with James that the best way to get him to calm down is just to have a conversation with him about whatever he's going through. You know, I came across him at a call box for an apartment that we did, and he was screaming into the call box, and I just sort of pulled him aside and said, "Hey James, what's going on?" And he just started telling me about various people who were after him and various people who were threatening him and
Right.
all this stuff, and I just kind of handed him a water and a cigarette and said, "Hey, well, you're in luck. I do security for this building, so I'll keep an eye on that. I won't let anything happen to you.
Right.
It's going to be okay." And his demeanor completely changed, and he was like, "Okay, yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate this a lot." And
Yeah.
he wandered off. James is really smart. I've had conversations
Yes.
with him
Yes.
when he's more lucid throughout the years. I mean, he was studying
When he
for his
first came down to
master's
Old
degree.
Town,
Yeah.
he was very regulated.
So where are you? Are you on Old Town tonight, or what's your?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And is that how frequently lately are you doing Old Town?
Generally about twice a week.
Okay. So a
I
good bit.
I work 5 days a week. They generally put me in Old Town 2 to 3 days a week.
Okay.
Old Town is typically run by our shift coordinators.
Okay.
Just because the relationship building is so important.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
And because it's also known as being sort of like a high need area, or
it's a very high need area. It's a very high engagement area.
okay. I'm going to end up next week. I'm going to sort of spend a full week writing about, in a big way, what you guys do as a company, and what's happening in the city and all these other things. But I think I'm going to do it through, spending a bunch of time with you guys in Old Town and what you guys are doing in Old Town. And,
For sure.
And would you say like so who are the 4 or 5 people that are sort of like, that have those relationships in Old Town?
So at night, it's myself, Austin Haynes, and Jacob Luskin. Those are our night shift community coordinators.
And it's usually one of the 3
It
years
is
doing Old Town.
almost always one of the 3 of us who is posted in Old Town.
You,
at
Jacob,
nights.
or Austin?
Myself, Jacob, and Austin.
And what about days?
Yes. Huh?
What about days?
Days, it generally abides by the same rules. Tally-ho train.
And so like Old Town in particular, when you say you usually start by driving, and then like where do you like if tonight, like give me I know it's different every night, but a general sense of like, where are you driving, where are you spending time, where do you anchor down?
So I'm gonna start my patrol. I mean, luckily Portland's a grid system, so I quite literally
Yeah.
go down first, up second, down third, up
Yeah,
fourth,
yeah.
down sixth, up Broadway.
Yep.
And just sort of see what the issues are. I'll park at one of our properties that's kind of out of the way, typically 3 Point Oil, because
place.
it's a secluded parking lot.
Yep.
That's not a highly trafficked area, and I can park my car behind a building, so it's not visible from the street. I personally have had my vehicle broken into twice and stolen once
Oh my
while
God.
working here.
That's right.
So
That's right.
now I'm very careful about where I park.
Yeah, I bet.
So I'll park there, and that's up at the top of Old Town, and that provides me a very good nexus point to be able to walk the rest of it.
Okay.
I will typically drive till about 8. I'll park my car, and I'll walk from 8 till about 11:30. And then at 11:30 to 1, Old Town gets a little hectic.
Yeah.
So I get back in my car, and that way I'm a little more call responsive.
Yep.
Because it's not a great feeling when you get called for a dispatch call and you're 15 minutes by
Sure.
foot from your vehicle.
Yep.
So
And on a typical night in Old Town, you might be responding to 4 or 5 calls.
Old Town doesn't get super heavy. I would say Old Town is probably between 5 to 10 calls.
Okay.
It's generally,
That's still pretty steady throughout the course of a night.
it's less typical security calls. It's more generally businesses that will be calling about things that are happening in the area.
Sure.
Yeah.
The Society Hotel will call us all the time for things that are just happening at 3rd and Davis
Sure.
because they know
Abnormal
that we're-
behaviors.
Yeah,
Right.
they know that
Well,
we're
that-
going to be there before the cops.
Right.
And because of the location
Yeah.
of the Society Hotel, they've been vocal in a lot of this stuff because
Yes.
it's hit them very, very significantly, right? I mean,
Correct.
So we
Yeah,
rely on
I've
a
had-
lot of our clients to provide us with, information about what's going on in the city.
That's right.
So typically from about 11:30 to 2, I'll be vehicle-based,
yep.
responding to calls. That's also when things get hectic in other districts, so that allows me to go check in on the downtown officer, Goose Hollow, Slabtown, Pop across
That's
the
right.
Lloyd if I need to.
Yep.
As a community coordinator, it's my responsibility to show up whenever anyone gets into a use of force.
So do me a
or anything
favor.
like that.
Look
Yeah.
back over your shoulder at these tents.
Yep.
You see anybody? One person,
I
right?
see one person popping
Remember how many
out.
people were there when we walked by earlier?
Yes.
How many? 15?
8, 10, 15?
Yeah, they're 15.
They
There
scour.
were.
They're 15. I counted.
And
And
it-
so
And it's
engagement,
Sure.
cameras brings everything down
Right.
legally, ethically, and morally.
Just
Right.
by having people out.
It's like civil rights movement. How many
Eyeballs.
racists are going to come out with dogs and fire hoses and look bad on the video? So if you own the streets and you do engagement right, you get less activity. Right? If we could stay here for another couple of hours and all the drug dealing would just end.
Because cameras are out here. and
Because
we're-
yeah, it's really that easy.
All you got to
I've
do is
definitely been able
hire a
to-
camera crew to do every block in the
Oh,
city.
that'd be awesome. Wish I could. Well,
Be out of a job.
it's the uniform and this because they don't know if he's security from that
Sure.
far away.
I mean, the uniform, like just even talking a little bit about it, seems like it has big pros and cons, right? Like
It's got just as many pros
Yes,
as cons,
correct, yeah,
honestly. Obviously, people will take you a little more seriously. People will respect your request. And it provides a good opportunity because when somebody in this uniform is extremely personable, handing out resources, I always talk to people in the city. Your contacts need to be casual, compassionate, and confident.
right.
Yeah,
And
I like
so-
that. Casual, confident.
3 C's.
Yeah, exactly.
Dude, that's good, bro.
And so people see somebody dressed like this being that way, and it sort of disarms them. But at the same time, we're what I like to refer to as cop-like objects.
Sure.
And people are not a big fan of cop-like objects.
Right.
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
And you were also saying like the relationships with law enforcement have,
They've come and
travel
gone.
around.
When I first started, law
Yeah.
enforcement was not a super huge fan of us because they were strapped and they were stressed and they were upset that we were taking their cake.
right.
And nowadays, the cops show up and they're almost relieved to see us there.
Yeah, yeah.
They show up and they go, "Oh, cool. Have you already checked all the doors? Did you clear it already? Have you made sure that you called the alarm company? You got the owner on the way? All right,
Right.
cool. Thank you for
We're
doing
outta here.
75% of our job. Here's
Yep.
a CAD number. We're gonna go to where the shooting is going to be."
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Because.
Because they got a lot to do,
the
and you're
police
removing.
get dogged on a lot in this city for
They
not
do.
coming to stuff.
They do.
But quite honestly, 90% of the things you call the police for, you don't actually need law enforcement for. Security is perfectly legally and able to handle that situation.
Right.
The police are really only necessary when you need, a mobilized response from the state.
Yep.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much, if somebody's rights need to be taken away, I'd like the state to do it.
So it's so
Their
it's,
freedom of movement or their freedom
Yeah,
to life, I would
exactly.
like the state to do that. But
Right.
And they're
other than that,
they're specifically qualified to do that.
yeah. Other than
And
that,
so-
though, I mean, I
So
am
it-
perfectly capable of asking a guy to please leave a convenience store
Yeah.
and stop throwing things.
Right. So in a given week, you're not calling the police very often.
I
mean,
call
if
the
there's
police-
an OD, you're calling for an ambulance?
I call medical if there's an OD. I call the police if we take somebody into custody. Obviously, we're required.
There was a gentleman that pulled a firearm the other day. Kind
Yes. Yeah, there was a man
This was a couple days ago.
on the 4th of July. There was a dude who had a firearm, was discharging it into the street, and being very aggressive with myself and Austin. And I'm on the phone with the police, with my firearm drawn to low ready, getting behind cover, listening to, please do not hang up. This is the 911 emergency line. Your call is very important to us. And then when they finally did pick up, I gave them all the information, and I actually had to hear the dispatcher go, yeah, well, we're on high priority calls only right now, so I don't have anyone I can assign to this call. And I'm just sort of like, there is a man with a firearm
Shooting
the ground.
in Old Town.
This
And
was
they
at
didn't have
4th and
anybody?
Burnside.
Yeah.
It took a good 5 minutes for the call to be assigned, and then another 5 minutes for the police to show up. By the time they did, the individual was off site, and all they did was grill me about whether or not I actually saw him shoot the firearm versus just heard him shoot the firearm.
Wow.
And then I gave them...
But y'all were able to de-escalate the situation.
Yeah, we were able to get him to walk away and give the police last known travel, so that was good.
I mean, it does make me think about like sort of your own personal safety in the job. I mean, so your car's been broken into twice, stolen once, gun pulled on you a few days ago.
Yeah.
Like how often is that stuff happening?
Not very often. Not often enough for it to not be worth the amount of help I get to give people. I tell people when they start out at this job that they need to find their why. They need to find the reason why they're out here doing this, because otherwise it will burn you out. Otherwise you will eventually be moving a dude who's covered in shit, who's throwing needles at you, and you'll be moving him and being real nice, and you'll start to think to yourself, hey, why don't I serve food at Olive Garden?
Sure.
And you have to have an answer to that question. You have to develop a reason of like, why is this worth it?
Right.
And as long as you have that reason for why it's worth it, this job remains worth all of the dumb stuff. Plus, then you have casual nights and you get to appreciate the spooky nights.
Sure.
There's nothing nicer than a slow night, and you're like, oh, that's cool. Somebody pulled a gun on me yesterday, so
Right.
I'll take
it.
it.
Yes.
I mean, are the casual nights rare or they're
So what I mean
In
by
Old Town, they're probably-
a casual night is nobody tried to hurt me.
Right.
A casual night for me is walking around, getting to know people, catching up with people who I haven't seen if I haven't been in that district for a while.
Yeah.
Seeing what's changed, seeing what dynamics on the street have changed. I really appreciate nights where I just get to engage with the community.
Sure. Go stop by, talk to James,
On nights where I have to do cop shit, that's less fun.
Sure.
I'm not
Yeah.
a cop. I would like the cops to do cop
We're taking up a
shit.
lot of your time, man.
You're good.
Let's head back.
All right.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Because I wanted him to get on patrol. And
For
do
sure.
his thing.
Yeah, do your thing.
You'll have plenty of
Well-
time to talk to people, I promise.
I know, that's great. What's your schedule? Like, what nights do you work?
I work Friday through Tuesday.
Friday through
And
Tuesday.
then sometimes Wednesdays if there's a call out.
And that's today?
No, today is a Monday. Today I'm scheduled.
Okay. So usually Friday to Tuesday.
Yeah.
And when do you figure out what district you're working in?
The schedule gets published the week ahead of time. And then plus I'm a community coordinator, so I have access to the schedule a couple weeks out.
Got it.
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting spot, let's just stop and talk about it for a second. So, you know the lady who has one arm
Yeah,
in Old
Alicia.
Town? Well, I wasn't going to name her, but yeah.
Of course you know her name.
So she lost her arm because she overdosed and fell asleep here at these tracks. And no one was awake, everyone was pretty much passed out, and a train came and took her arm off.
Oh my goodness.
And this lady, that was
How
like
long ago was
3
this?
years ago maybe?
Wow.
That's before I started.
Yeah. And she's still walking around Old Town living in a tent, man. Like, and
I
this,
saw her yesterday.
Yeah. Prior to this, she was actually more normalized. So this was a really traumatic incident. Obviously,
Yep.
there's some mental health things because we saw her behavior change from that incident, and she's still living here in Old Town.
Wow. And you saw her on patrol.
I spoke with her yesterday, yeah.
Wow.
I see her regularly.
She's been with the same guy for like 4 years,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. She and her boyfriend are still together. They actually live in a tent down under that
Yep.
bridge right down there.
That's right.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, how many people do you think are homeless right now in Old Town?
I couldn't give you an estimation. It's over 100.
Yeah.
Oh, easily.
And you know,
well over
and you
100.
probably know many of them.
By name.
By name.
Absolutely.
I would say there's around 80 to 100 tents. When we came into Old Town, there were about 400 to 450 tents,
Wow.
and I would assume 1.25 occupants per tent.
Yeah.
So, Old Town was historically sheltering 15% of the total homeless population of Oregon. It's a
Okay.
tiny little neighborhood.
Wow.
Okay, and so right
Every
now
block
there's
looked
probably
like
80
that
to
Yep.
100
when I
tents
started.
Okay.
on average.
Yep.
80 to 100. So it's decreased significantly,
Yeah.
but
But it's still a high
it's
concentration.
very high concentration.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very high concentration.
Yeah.
We're doing
Well, it means
We do
you
what we can. These aren't even our properties, man.
Sure.
That's not our property.
Right.
This isn't our property. But we do what we can. We offer sheltering. We work with nonprofits.
Sure.
So,
And also, I'm guessing like your clients understand that by working here, you're reducing some of the issues that they might end up dealing
Correct.
with.
I would say that even when it's not on our property, people are generally happy to see us out giving resources and providing a presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We obviously don't provide security for properties that aren't
Yeah,
ours,
exactly.
but I like to think we provide security for the community in general,
Totally.
just by being around.
Yeah.
yeah, because engagement. It's
Yeah.
about as engagement increases, criminal activity decreases.
Yep.
So
Well, that means you got more work to do.
Absolutely.
I know we don't have a
Ple-
lot of time.
Yeah,
You've got to
pleasure.
get on patrol, bro.
It's a pleasure to meet
man.
both of you guys.
Likewise.
You know you're my favorite.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully you've met him before.
Yeah, just a couple of times.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Just a couple of times.
We're walking back with you.
All right.
Well, no, Alex has it so he can text it to you, or maybe you can link us up with a text and
Yeah.
contact.
Okay. Yeah.
And that way I can figure
Easy.
out what your schedule is
Not a problem.
next week.
Absolutely. I'm
and
happy
we
to
can-
have you with me.
We can link up.
All right.
Love it.
It'll especially be like, to do some of those stretches where you're, starting out in the car, walking around with you. And honestly, next week it will be, it's just like me and a notebook hanging out.
Right on.
Yeah, I'll walk with you.
Have a good night, you guys.
Take care, guys.